Exclusive polling from EWTN News and Real Clear Opinion Research is shedding light on where the faithful stand both politically and culturally. Yesterday, we examined why President Joe Biden's favorable rating among Catholics has dropped, and now we take a look at Catholic views on the importance of confession and the real presence in the Eucharist. From Real Clear Politics, we are joined by Andrew Walworth, Chief Content Officer, and Susan Crabtree, White House and National Political Correspondent, as well as Dr. Matthew Bunson, Executive Editor and Washington Bureau Chief for EWTN News. Great to be with you all again. Susan, I want to start with you. In the previous discussion, we looked at the political situation with Catholics, especially in light of President Biden's approval ratings. What are some of the social and cultural issues in the poll that you found to be potentially key to the midterms?
I thought it was really interesting that when it comes to this fierce national debate we're having over abortion since the Supreme Court decision on June 24th overturning Roe v. Wade, that even though a slight majority opposed that decision of the Catholic vote, 60% of Catholics still would be less likely to support a political candidate who supports abortion until birth, so unfettered abortion, compared to just 32% who said they would be more likely. And I think that has to do with, the Catholic teachings on the subject. The Catholic vote is much more aware of the nuances of what overturning Roe v. Wade is doing. By a solid majority, 62% said that they are aware that the decision would result in just sending the federal and state legislators would now determine, the state legislators would now determine how to regulate abortion, as opposed to just 24% who believed abortion immediately would become illegal nationwide. And I also thought that this conscious rule that I covered during the Trump era, I thought that was interesting, their responses on that. That means that healthcare workers can opt out of procedures that they're not comfortable with, such as abortion, sex reassignment therapy, physician-assisted suicide. On that issue, Catholics, voters support that conscience rule. Also on gender issues, there was very strong feelings on that. An overwhelming majority of Catholics believe that gender was created by God rather than determined by individuals. And they also thought that 56% thought that allowing transgender people to participate in girls' sports teams conflicts with Catholic teaching. Those are the top lines on those cultural issues, but they were very, very well educated on those topics.
Yeah, and Matthew, one of the really most striking findings also had to do with violence against Catholic churches and also the pro-life pregnancy centers as well. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we saw in the 2020 polling that Catholics are very concerned about attacks and vandalism on churches, the tearing down of statues. That has continued, but we're actually seeing increases in the level of concern on the part of Catholics across the board. That cuts across every category of Catholic, whether you go to Mass on a daily and weekly basis or almost never. Catholics are very worried about attacks on churches. Obviously, it is in the news. We cover it here on EWTN News Nightly. We cover it across all of EWTN News. But Catholics are also worried about just the level of anti-Christian sentiment that we're finding in the United States today, and protests against Supreme Court justices and their houses and other things. So I think this is a kind of visceral reaction on the part of Catholics to what they're seeing as anti-Christian atmosphere, but also just the general levels of unrest and sort of social deterioration in the country.
Yeah, a big concern for so many of us. Andy, I know you've been paying a lot of attention to the Latino vote. Let's talk a little bit about that. What did the poll have to say about Latino Catholics?
Well, it was interesting because take a question like right track, wrong track for the country as a whole. Catholics as a whole, 59% see the country going on the wrong track, which is a pretty high number. 68% of white Catholics, only 45% of Catholic Latinos see the country going on the wrong track. So Latinos, something out there is working for Catholic Latinos that is, at least in their perception, it's working for them, not so much for other demographic groups. The other thing, though, just sort of more anecdotally, was this challenge to Henry Cuellar down in Texas, who was really challenged in the primary, or rather in the runoff. and held on to his vote. Henry Cuellar is the only pro-life Democrat left in the House right now. So, Tracy, it's interesting to think that in that particular race, where you would think that with a big Latino population, he was able to hang on. So, interesting sort of anecdotal information about how Latinos are viewing things.
Yeah, certainly. Susan, I want to bring you back into this. I know that you've really been a keen observer of American politics for so many years now. Based on this poll and your study of American politics, do you think that Catholics are as polarized as the rest of America right now?
Well, it seems like if you have on the approval rating question and the right track, wrong track, they're less polarized than the rest of the country. It's funny, you have I would say about 10% difference in the approval rating that Biden is actually doing better among Catholics, but it's still pretty lopsided. And when we talk about the wrong track, that's a huge alarm bells. That should set off huge alarm bells for the Biden administration and incumbents, mainly Democrats, who are controlling both chambers of Congress. So in that capacity, we saw that there's 59% of Catholics said the country is on the wrong track. But 75% of all voters believe the country's off course. So that's like a 16-point spread. So Catholics are actually less divided than the rest of the country.
Yeah, and Matthew, not a whole lot of time left, but I want to leave this last question to you. Talk to us a little bit about maybe some of the other notable findings from this poll.
Well, from a Catholic standpoint, the devotional and sacramental practice of Catholics is of intense interest to us as a network, but it should be of interest to all Catholics. What we found, in exactly as we did in 2020, that 50% of Catholics believe in the real presence of the Eucharist. That number shifts significantly, however, depending upon how often you actually go to Mass, so that 73% of those who go daily or weekly believe in the real presence. That number drops to about 23% to those who almost never go. That then has an effect also on how often you go to confession. 37% of all Catholics go to confession, but then we're getting into single digits with those who do not attend Mass on a regular basis. That's important as a teaching moment for us, but it also then has this impact on how you're viewing the world, how you're viewing things like Roe v. Wade, and likely how you're going to vote.
Yeah, and Andy, last question here for you. What can we expect in the few coming months? Anything significant, especially for Catholics?
Well, we're going to continue polling. We're going to look more at these cultural issues. Certainly, one of the big questions is to what degree the Roe v. Wade decision is actually going to affect the midterms. And again, it may not be reflected in sort of national numbers, but certainly in certain local races and statewide races, it could be an important factor. So I think that if I had to say one thing I'd be looking at, I'd be following Catholic attitudes about Roe v. Wade going forward. Just add one other thing really quickly, which is that only 61% of the people we polled, the Catholics we polled, knew that Joe Biden was a Catholic.
Wow.
And I think that is really interesting because I don't know what the number is, but I'd love to know what the number was when JFK was president. I would imagine it's closer to 110%.
Well, definitely interesting findings indeed. And thank you all so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.